This method that we'll talk about a little later includes a lot of different approaches, but also systems that can feel very comfortable for someone who's highly relational, but also be effective. I started calling it the softer side of selling because it really appealed to people who value relationships more than the final sale.
Hey everyone, I'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Brand Power Analysis. Today I have on
Christine Clifton.
Welcome, Christine. Welcome to the podcast. I'd love to get to know a little bit more about you, and then we'll dive into our main topic for the day, soft selling. So why don't you start off by talking a little bit more about yourself, your story?
Sure, I'm happy to. I think this story is an interesting one, even though I'm a little biased, it's mine. But I did spend 20 years in a corporate management role before I became an entrepreneur. And I started my entrepreneurship as a coach for people with chronic illness. I myself deal with chronic illness. I have a genetic connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. So I am very attuned to the health and wellness of my body and physical wellness. And when I stepped into my practice, I didn't know what the heck I was doing. I figured I could do this thing. How hard could it be? And a couple years into it, I realized that I just wasn't getting the traction that I wanted. And I entered this $10,000 group coaching program for business coaching and was learning all this stuff and implementing everything that they were telling me to do. And it just wasn't working for me. And at the end of a year, it was $10,000 out of my pocket, and I was close to broke and pretty much burnt out. Totally despondent about how this had gone because I'd really hung my hat on this thing working for me. And I just couldn't figure out why it wasn't. So I had to do some real deep reflection. Am I going to go back to corporate, or am I going to continue this thing in terms of starting my own business? And I said, you know what? I can do it. Let me really think about the things that have landed and what was the secret sauce to those. And so I took a real objective approach to looking at myself, what had worked, who I am as a person, and started developing an approach with people that really fit me well, much better than I realized that the program hadn't actually fit me. So as I started implementing what I was recognizing as a system, I was having people come up to me in my small business community going, Christine, how are you doing all of this? Like, we see you everywhere, and you have so much energy. So it's not like you're doing too much. Like, what are you doing? We want to know. And I started teaching in small groups, small business owners, how to do what I was doing. And what I found was that people who started small business were super great at what they did, but they weren't super great at the business side, or more importantly, the sales side. They could sell widgets better than they can sell themselves. And that's a very common thing. It's very personal. So as I worked with these smaller groups, I refined my body of work, and I started calling it the softer side of selling because it really appealed to people who are what I call highly relational. And my definition of that is people who value relationships more than the final sale. You're not going to have a sales conversation and push until the person won't even pick up your phone call, right? And this method that we'll talk about a little later includes a lot of different approaches, but also systems that can feel very comfortable for someone who's highly relational, but also be effective. And so my career kind of evolved in the entrepreneur space, where I was doing this marketing piece, but then I started consulting the small business owners with selling. And then as I was consulting with them with selling, and they weren't doing some of the things I was telling them they needed to do, even in the highly relational format, I realized that there's something even deeper that was stopping them. And I started digging into what I call the BS, or the belief systems, that was stopping them from doing what they needed to do. And it added a whole nother layer and a deeper layer to my work, because I could now see the theme and what was stopping them. And it was almost like, defragging the software that was getting in the way, and address that so that whatever they do from that point on wouldn't get in the way anymore. And that's pretty much where I am now, where I harmonize the kind of what I call inner work, or the being of the person, with the outer work, or the doing of the person. And I work with entrepreneurs in business development, as I said, but I also work with career changers, and the concepts are the same. They have to self-promote, right? And career changers who want to change fields, they have a bit of an obstacle, at least they perceive it, because if they want to switch from, I'm going to be silly here, being an astronaut to being an underwater basket weaver, like somehow they've got to position themselves as the best underwater basket weaver ever. And so when they come into me, it's the same thing. It's a mindset thing, because I need to eliminate their the stories they've told themselves about the immediate limitations that they see without even having tried it, but then also get them to see who they are today, what fits them, and then how we will go about, helping them self-promote. So that's it in a nutshell.
Interesting. One thing that I really picked up there towards the beginning of the conversation was you talked a lot about, you were a marketing, you were in consulting, and you kind of made this shift to your brand, yourself, your personality, and in a way, it seems like soft selling is a brand, an emotional brand way for certain types of personal brands to sell based off of just who they are as people. So, can you explain to me a little bit about how you went through that transition and that mindset shift, and then we can kind of get a little bit into soft selling altogether?
Sure. Well, like I said, I had tried the things that other people told me I should try. And it's things like, 50 cold calls a day, and, following up until somebody says no. And one thing they even taught us, it makes me cringe even saying this, they taught us how to move someone through a sales conversation, coaching them how to sell their belongings in order to afford my coaching. Right? Like, that makes me vomit a little bit.
Yeah,
I know,
yeah.
and so, but at the time I was naive about things, and I'm like, really? Is this the thing to do? So when I had no success, and started thinking what would fit me better, I started also thinking about how would I like to be sold to? Like, what do I want as an individual? And I started thinking that I want engagement. I want someone who really is interested in what makes me tick, and what I'm really about, and what I really need. And so I just kind of flipped that, and I said, if I'm working with other highly relational people, then it's likely they're going to want something similar. And what highly relational people do, how do you know who a highly relational person is? You get them on the phone, and the first thing they say is, "How are you? How are you doing? Did you have a vacation yet this summer? Like, how's the family?" And it's one little clue that you can pick up on. And so, like attracts like, if your
Hmm.
listeners believe in law of attraction or power of positive thinking. So as a highly relational person myself, I was attracting highly relational people into my life. And so it became this real science experiment as I was working with people to learn how to sit down and really talk to them when I would initially meet them in networking, and then finding out their pains and what they were really facing, and what the root cause of the issue was. So for example, I could say all day that I could help you make more money and get more clients,
Yes.
but my particular audience or ideal client, they are nervous when they go networking, or they stand up to give their elevator pitch and their mind goes blank, right? Or they go to sell in a sales conversation and they don't want to close it. Like it feels icky to them to close it right there. And that's the real pain that's behind them wanting to grow their business and help more people. And I began to see that. And I knew ways to do that because I'm a highly relational person. Now, in corporate, I was in human resources for 11 years, and I happened to have been an internal sales coach to the commercial division of my company for 2 years. And so I had exposure to commercial industrial sales, as I would call it. Not sexy. We sold plastic, acrylic plastic, but the concepts are the same, right? And so I brought those concepts in, but again, modified them so that I could begin to cater to different styles of people. And I used the DISC assessment. I don't know if you're familiar with DISC. It's a behavioral style assessment. And so I was beginning to see the people that I was working with as being I call the I style an interactor and the S style a supporter. I've turned them into avatar names because I think it's easier for people to picture what the styles are instead of the technical names. And they are both on the relational side of the DISC matrix. So, it was almost like I was my own behavioral scientist as I was out there. And it was just a morphing. It was like slapping a piece of clay on a wheel to form pottery and just start molding it as I started talking with and finding out the pains, but also then seeing what worked for me. Now, the other aspect in my case is that I mentioned before I have a chronic illness. So I have stamina challenges sometimes, and going in big groups of people like networking can drain me really easily. And I also tend to be a little on the introverted side. I'm really an ambivert, but I'm a little on the introvert side. And I want to make any interaction I have, I want to maximize it, right? So I want to get as great a result from the least amount of effort as I possibly can in my business development. And I want to do it in a way that isn't icky, like those people at the networking event that deal out their business card like a poker hand, like and then they're off to the next group. Like, I don't want to be that way. So that's, the how I started formulating it. And I am Virgo. So if anybody follows zodiac signs, we're known for our planning and organization. So I also had this knack of being able to put and see the themes of putting things into systems and putting it, I call it a business development ecosystem. And so to put it in a system so that it kind of runs automatically for the individual, and they don't have to focus on that as much, right? And there's a big feast or famine that happens, especially with service business owners, because they put their head down to do all the work, and then they come up and have no leads in the pipeline, and they've got to go out networking in business development, and then they get more clients and they put their heads down, and the vicious cycle continues. So the ecosystem is one way to keep the activity going so that the leads and opportunities and prospects can keep coming in. So that's how I developed it.
How did you so a little bit about it. You talk a lot about referrals and the system focusing on referrals. Now, do these referrals have to be do they have to be warmer? Like, are you going to events? Are you going to trade shows? Or is it more so like, is there an opportunity for this system to work for, like you said, online companies, people that have to do digital marketing, for instance, or go on podcasts, and how would that somewhat work for someone that has an audience that's more online?
That's a great question. When I started out, as I mentioned, I was circling in my local business community. One of my businesses after my coaching practice was a wellness studio, right? So I was brick and mortar. So I put feet on the street in the town I was in, and I started going out and meeting everybody. And so it's definitely a different environment than online. And actually, it's almost like two completely different planets,
Yeah.
But the concepts still apply. And what I see similar to what I'm talking about in person. So most of my clients tend to be service entrepreneurs. So they're selling a service or selling what they're actually doing. But what I'm seeing online that is very similar, like, think about how popular quizzes have become in lead development in digital marketing. Like everyone on Facebook, like, what kind of popcorn am I? You know, they're going to take a quiz. And what I'm seeing in digital marketing is, you know, quizzes are really great lead funnels these days. So it helps qualify the person through the quiz. And then on the other side of the quiz is hopefully, usually, some personal experience of the person, you know, who they might, be selling that product. So there's a video or a teleclass or something like that where they can then experience the person. So those are ways to kind of lead them in, and instead of just, here's the landing page, buy my stuff, it's what I call bridge building. So if I build a variety of bridges that I invite people across them, then the power goes in the shoes of the decider, not me. Like the burden of responsibility is not on me. It's on them to decide when and if they walk across one of those bridges. And the bridges I'm going to build are the ones that I want to play in, you know, they're activities I want to be doing. So similarly online, it might be, you know, this, of course, classic, land on a website. There's a irresistible free offer. People opt into the newsletter to get the irresistible free offer. Then on the newsletter, they'll be getting a drip campaign to get to know the person. And hopefully there's some PSs in the drip campaign that link through to a video on YouTube, you know. So these are all ways that can incorporate these relational methods of selling instead of it just being like, I remember getting a drip campaign where I was getting multiple emails a day. You know, it was like 21 emails in 7 days or something crazy like that. So when I did my drip email, I'm like, I'm not going to do that to people. People got an email every 3 or 4 days for a month. And, you know, if they weren't going to convert by then, in my opinion, they're not going to convert, right? So, and they're still on my newsletter. So at least they're going to get my newsletter once a month. So that's a great question. I see it working in digital today, and you can make it highly relational if you want to. And there's a lot of mediums that can allow you to do that.